Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, EVP of Products and Services here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, I am pleased to have Greg Edwards as our guest. Greg is the founder and CEO of CryptoStopper, which despite the name is not a cryptocurrency company. CryptoStopper is a software company that provides ransomware protection by automatically detecting and stopping ransomware attacks. Greg has deep roots in the IT service provider business, having started a managed IT services company back in the 90s. Since then, he has started two companies based on technologies built to solve the IT problems of the companies he was serving. During our discussion, we dive into the world of ransomware and why it seems to be getting worse. He shares his perspective on how we got here, why the maturity of the ransomware business is so important, and what we can expect in the next 2 to 3 years. Finally, before we wrap up, we get to hear a little about his side hobby, building planes. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Greg Edwards. Greg, welcome to Cut the Shit. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Bryan.
Excellent, excellent. So tell us, looks like you're in your home office. Tell us where you are today.
So I am based just north of Iowa City, Iowa. I live on a little 60-acre farm kind of out here in the middle of nowhere.
Excellent. And your company is based close by, I understand, but you guys are not, tell us about your workforce. Are you guys hybrid, remote? Is everybody in one place? What's the story?
Yeah, so we went to a hybrid model in 2017. And so we've been doing remote and some office. And then since the pandemic, actually have gone completely remote. So we're now all 100% remote.
So the move in 2017, was that done for recruiting purposes? What was the logic of the move in 2017?
So we used to do exercises where we would test our disaster recovery plan, and we would do that for 1 week. We'd send everybody home and work remotely for 1 week every year. And probably in 2015 and then 2016, everyone really liked that. And so we said, well, why, we don't need to keep adding to our office space. Let's give people the ability to completely work remotely. And then that's when we went to the hybrid model, was after that.
Got it. So it made it real easy when the pandemic hit.
Yeah, because everyone already had full capabilities to work from home. And this was just, okay, now nobody goes to the office at all.
Right. Didn't have to. So, just made that transition pretty seamless.
Right.
Yeah. And so how many folks do you have at CryptoStopper?
So 12.
Okay. And one of the things that I always like to ask, if we talk to companies that are purely remote, what are you guys doing about getting people together face to face now? Is that something you're trying to do at all, or how are you handling that?
Yeah, so we do quarterly meetings where we do get together face to face, but that's not all hands. And then
I assume that's people local?
No, we actually travel for that. So we'll pick a location.
Gotcha.
And have an executive leadership team meeting offsite. But then for the face-to-face and the regular, we do an all hands meeting every other Monday and have everyone on, do an update of what's happening within the company, and then do an Ask Me Anything session that is primarily directed at me, but then others can ask anything that they want at that time.
Right. And that's Zoom, because you've got folks, I assume, here and there and everywhere?
Yep. It feels like all Zoom all the time.
Understood. All right. Well, let's kind of jump into it. Why don't you give us a thumbnail sketch on your background and sort of how you got started in technology?
Yeah, so I've been in technology. Actually, it was my first job was in technology, and then have stayed in technology ever since. I started managed services practice back in 1998, and I still own and run that company today. And then I've started 2 SaaS businesses out of that MSP business, one being an offsite backup and disaster recovery company. I sold that to a publicly traded company in 2016 and then started CryptoStopper after that.
Gotcha. And you mentioned technology being, sort of your early start, kind of getting in on the ground floor, so to speak. What was your first technology job?
So my very first technology job was at a company called Applied Systems, that just tech support job. So working in tech support, supporting an insurance application that at the time about 75% of independent insurance agencies used.
Gotcha. I remember I worked at an independent insurance agency once upon a time, and I remember there were these forms. I want to say they were Accord or Accord or something like that.
Yep,
Is that right?
Yep.
Was that a competitor or was that just something different?
That actually was integrated into the software, so you could fill out your Accord forms on the system.
All right, makes sense. Yeah, that was mid '90s, so that was a while ago.
Yep, that was early on in the move to all computerized insurance systems, which seems like mid '90s, like they should have been there way before that, but.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably ask that question about a lot of late adopters to technologies, particularly insurance, though, because I guess it seems like one that was and is tailor made for technology, for computers, if you will.
Definitely.
Yeah. So why don't let's back up, take a couple steps back. Tell us about the MSP that you started and why you started that.
Well, so I started it actually when I was leaving the insurance software company. I was talking with technicians that didn't understand how to configure the systems to make the insurance software work well.
Right.
And so it was a natural move to go and support throughout the state of Iowa a big portion of the independent insurance agencies, and that was the vertical that I started out in. I was 24 years old, had no idea what I was doing as a business owner, but figured it out as I went. And back then it was all break fix, so it was all the number of hours that we billed, and that's how we made money.
Gotcha. All right. And then the backup business, I assume, sprung from the MSP.
Yeah, so we started doing offsite tape. We were doing what Iron Mountain ended up doing, and we were keeping the tapes for our clients, and then actually built systems so that we could recover their office at our office location, which sounds archaic at this point. But then we had this idea of, hey, let's use the distributed computing systems that we have and build our own data center and do the backups online, which at the time in around 2002, that was a pretty novel idea. And then actually launched that as a separate business in 2007, still even before the cloud was the cloud.
Right.
And grew that into a really nice national size business where we still focused on insurance agencies, but grew that nationally. And we're doing offsite backup. And really that's where I started seeing the rise of the ransomware attacks, and part of the reason for selling that business and focusing on cybersecurity.
Got it. Well, that was one of the things I did want to ask you, is what was the motivation for the start? And I assumed it sprung again from a problem that you were seeing in the MSP service business.
Exactly. So I started seeing ransomware attacks as far back as 2012. And really the thing that made me decide to focus on cybersecurity in general were the calls that we would get from non-backup clients. So people would find us online, and we would write articles about recovering from ransomware. And so people would just find us and call us. And I remember specifically having a gentleman call. I'd actually taken the emergency support over a Thanksgiving holiday for the team, so everybody else could take the time off, and I worked, which we do as business owners.
Yep.
And so a gentleman called, and nearly in tears. I mean, this was sounded like late 50s, early 60s gentleman. and he was about in tears over this ransomware attack that he wasn't sure how he was going to keep his business up and going. And he wasn't a client, so we didn't have good backups. He didn't know if he had good backups.
Right.
That was a specific event that I recall. And even when we had good backups, so we could recover our cloud backup clients. We could have them back up and running in our environment in about 2 hours, which, 10 years ago, that was pretty amazing.
Sure.
But even that was hugely disruptive. And so having a backup be that last line of defense just wasn't good enough. And so that's where we eventually built CryptoStopper to be that last line of defense, so you didn't have to rely on backup.
Well, let's talk about that, because you said something that I think I'm not sure a lot of people really understand. Non-technology people understand. I think a lot of people probably think ransomware is very new because it seems so much more prevalent now. And I don't know if that's because of news coverage, which I think is part of it, but I've talked to the insurance guys and there definitely there've been more incidences. And so I'm curious to know your perspective on why do you think that's happened, particularly in the last couple of years? Is that mostly because of COVID, or is there some other factor? Are there other factors involved?
So I think the primary factor is that these attackers are just now getting good at their craft. So if you look back at the evolution of hackers, and most people think of a hacker as some young guy, typically male, right, in their mom's basement hacking away, and that's not the attackers that we're dealing with today. So Bitcoin was introduced and became prevalent in 2012. And that's really when the first ransomware attack started hitting.
It made anonymous payment possible in a way that had never been before.
Exactly. And so that gave rise then to the cybersecurity nightmare that we have today, was these attackers being able to get paid anonymously and from anywhere in the world. And so it's just evolved. I mean, they're now, these hackers are really organized businesses. I mean, it's organized crime is what it is.
Sure.
And they run them as businesses, and that evolution has just taken time, and they're just now getting good at what they do.
And when you say getting good, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so from the standpoint of operating and running a business, they're perfecting their craft now. And prior to that, it was much more of individuals that were just good hackers. And now once you've introduced that monetary gain to the equation, now it's something that people strive to become. And especially when you take into account that in Russia, it is not illegal for a Russian citizen to attack any business in the world as long as they're not within Russia. So it's 100% legal. And why wouldn't, I mean, as a young technologist coming up, if they see that they could make millions of dollars doing something that's completely illegal, stealing money from enemies of Russia, then why not?
Right.
So there's no ethical dilemma. And it's, so I think that the problems that we have now all stem from the fact that cryptocurrency became available in around the 2012 timeframe, and they're just now getting really good at what they do.
Got it. So you see it less as a function of the move home or remote work, and more a function of, I'll call it market dynamics. Maybe that's not the right way to think about it, but it kind of is. Technology advance in the sense of crypto.
Right. I mean, the pandemic exacerbated it for sure, but it was coming whether the pandemic happened or not.
Well, and I've had this discussion with folks on this front, and I guess I'd ask you this question, and maybe it'll verify or refute the thesis, but how much ransomware isn't email based at this point?
So about 50%. It's about an even split now
between email and
other methods of
others. Okay.
Yeah. So the next most common would be remote, so they gain access remotely. And
Right. So that's, yeah, okay. And then texting and voice phishing, I know is another
supply chain
vector. Right.
So where they infect, like the SolarWinds event, where they infect known good software and deploy it that way.
The reason I asked the question is because we'll take 3 of those vectors: email, text, and phone. All have existed long before remote work became a real. Those were all available 10 years ago, right? I mean,
Right.
as possible options for making it, being able to gain access to something to allow ransomware to get installed.
Exactly.
All right. Well, since you've had a bunch of experiences with this and your company is on the front lines, can you share some specific examples of successful ransomware attacks that were novel or interesting, or something about them that you think is worth others knowing about in terms of their characteristics?
Yeah. So just dealt with one where the attackers encrypted, and this was a non-CryptoStopper client, but I get, because I'm on podcasts like this, I get lots of requests for,
Sure.
hey, can you help direct on a recovery? And in this particular instance, it was 11 servers that the VMware host, and then I know there's non-technical people listening, so essentially the entire server session was encrypted. Rather than encrypting the individual files, it encrypted the entire server sessions for this company of 620 employees and shut them down completely. So that's the first time where I saw that it was encrypting the entire VMware host, and at that level,
Rather than the files themselves.
rather than the individual files themselves. So that was definitely
Yikes.
yeah, yes.
What was the remediation option under those circumstances?
Yeah, so recovering from backups, but they also encrypted the local backups. So luckily this company had offsite images of their servers, and so they could recover from them.
So they rolled back behind. They were able to roll back behind.
Yep.
Interesting. We backups are obviously part of, and we'll get into this, but backups are part of the tool, one of the tools in the toolkit, so to speak. But it doesn't mean it's not a, if you have to use backups, well, there's by definition a loss, right? It's a question of how much, depending on depending on how you've got your backup system structured and the time between backups and that sort of thing. Given your background in the backup business and moving here, how are you seeing? Are there any changes happening on the backup front that you think are helpful in terms of what we're dealing with, or is it is what it is, as it's important and helpful, but it's after the fact, and so you're going to have some collateral damage?
Well, so it's multifold, but I would say that the backups certainly have improved, and the ability to have a backup that is on-site and off-site is critical. And I think backing up those entire server images and the ability to roll that forward and bring it back up that way. The thing that has improved is the protection around those backups. So the backup companies have recognized, okay, these attackers are going to come after not only the data, but all of the backups.
Sure.
And so that protection of the backups is really important.
So things like air gaps and some stuff that's happening like that again, when I was a CIO 2015, air gapped wasn't an expression that I ever heard. That we didn't. Exactly. It was a new term when I kind of came back to the space a few years ago.
Yeah. So that really has improved in the backup space in recent years. But like you mentioned earlier, it's still a loss. I mean, you're still, if you have an entire company taken down and you're recovering from backups because of a ransomware attack, that's a failure in my opinion.
Right. So you mentioned that as a problem that CryptoStopper was trying to solve. So tell us a little bit about CryptoStopper and what's the premise of the company and the particular product or services that you guys are offering today.
Yeah, so CryptoStopper, what it does is it actually recognizes a ransomware attack actively running. So whether that's file exfiltration or file encrypting, it'll recognize that and then it'll stop the process that's running it, and then isolate that device from the rest of the network so that it can't spread. And so when you think about it in those terms of it's detecting an actively running ransomware, then that means that ransomware attack got past all of the other protections.
Right.
And now if CryptoStopper wasn't there, it's going to run until it encrypts everything, and then you're looking at backups and
Right.
hoping you have good backups. And so the premise is that we want to stop that attack very quickly, and our algorithm will detect and stop an attack in less than a second. And so typically 4 to 5 files will be encrypted before we recognize it. So you're still, I mean, backup is still important in this because you still need to recover those 4 or 5 files, but you're not talking entire system down.
It's not a pure prevention strategy, but it's a heavy duty intervention system.
It's damage control.
And I would assume it's installed locally. Again, I don't know a lot about it because I've been in Italy for a week and didn't do my research. Frankly, I just to be honest with you, because I would have already known this. But my assumption is this is sort of the same way AV software works, in the sense of the locality. It's on the device itself. Right.
Correct. Yep. It's an agent that's installed on desktops, laptops, and servers, and then it's watching for those actions of ransomware.
So it's an installed agent that monitors, right, and is looking for certain kinds of behaviors.
Yep. Exactly.
Got it. Okay. Excellent. Well, that's exciting. That's how is business going so far?
Really well. So we sell exclusively through managed service providers, and we have just crossed the 100 MSP threshold, and just started. We just took this to market in April of last year.
Good. Wow, that's good growth. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Let's transition just a bit. We've kind of talked specifically about ransomware, maybe a couple of examples of what they, how they sort of work. Let's take one step up and talk a little bit about sort of at the meta level as we think about the idea of layered security or zero trust approaches in terms of security posture. It's something we talk to our customers about and are leveraging for ourselves as we think about our own security posture at Plow. What's your take on zero trust as sort of a philosophical underpinning for how to be smart about security, and how has that evolved from, again, you've been around this game for a while. How have you seen that evolve over time?
So, I mean, I love the concept of zero trust and getting to that point. The problem is getting clients, getting your customers to that level. It's very, very difficult to get to a pure zero trust stance. So I love the concept of it. I think ultimately we're working toward that direction, and I think we'll need to get there. I think right now the realistic view is layered security. So having the right tools in place and having the right backups in place to be able to recover as we're moving toward that zero trust posture.
Yeah, we always think of the way I generally describe it to people is I say zero trust is, I won't say it's unobtainable, but it's more of an aspiration than anything else. Like, to get there, you've got to follow a crawl, walk, run, marathon. I don't even know where you go beyond run, because it's not just running to say you really are zero trust. And implicit in it is, the assumption that you are going to get breached, right? So by definition, within the context or construct of zero trust is the assumption that you're not 100% secure. right? Because there really is no such thing, at least today. Maybe we can get some sort of vaccine that we can all be vaccinated from security breaches, but no one has figured that out yet. So
right. Yeah, I am in 100% agreement with you on the fact that it's not unobtainable. It definitely can be done, but most companies can't operate, at least not yet. And again, it's a process of getting there, not something you turn on tomorrow.
Yeah, and the overhead and expenses is real. I mean, it's not this not, hey, spend a couple of bucks a user and you're all set, right? And no one will know. I mean, there's things that can happen behind the scenes that they don't know about, but there's also real, I use the word overhead, meaning there's real overhead for the user in terms of how they interact with their machines, how they interact with the network, that sort of thing that they've got to deal with.
Well, and you think about just this, what I consider the simplest of things, turning on multi-factor authentication. Like that should be across the board, just done, right? And companies will push back and complain about having to do that.
Sure, because their employees will complain.
Right.
And if they don't have an outsourced help desk, their internal IT support people will get swamped with angry employees who can't get access to their, computers. Right. I mean,
yeah. And so that shift in mentality has to come from the top down. So when companies, and especially if it's an IT department or an outsourced IT managed service provider, you've got to get that executive level buy-in and have that executive level buy-in push down through the rest of the organization rather than IT trying to push it up.
100% agree. And that's a variation on a theme when it comes to internal IT, right? I mean, if anytime that it's seen as standalone or something IT is doing something to us as the business, you're lost, right? I mean, it's that'll put you at the bar drinking beer as the IT director, frustrated because you can't get anything done. I mean, it really is, right? If you can't find a way to connect what you do to helping the business be successful, whether that's grow revenue or in this case, protect us from, the end or, sort of existential threats, then that's part of the challenge, right?
Right. Well, and I have seen in the last 18 months, I've definitely seen a shift in the CEO level and executive management level of embracing security. They don't necessarily know what it is or what needs to be done. They just know something needs to be done.
Sure. They don't want to be in the papers. They don't want to deal with the financial fallout from a major security event. They want to be able to get their cybersecurity insurance policies renewed, which is, I don't know what you guys are seeing, but that we're seeing a ton of turmoil in that particular area right now with clients. I'm assuming you're seeing some of the same.
Yeah, well, and it's because the cyber liability insurance companies have finally recognized how to define the risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And they realized they were way underpricing it before.
Right. And when you ask the right questions to ensure that a company is secured, then it changes things.
Sure. And we've had some conversations with independent insurance agents and with the carriers themselves. And it's interesting how few people inside those organizations really had an understanding of what the risk itself was when it came to what they were covering, right? I mean, not that it's not an agent's job to necessarily understand, at a deep level what the risk itself would be, but they do need to know enough to say, hey, look, just because you have insurance, if nothing else, there's a deductible associated with that, and if you have a loss, you're looking at real cost here associated with the event. And so let's do everything we can to make sure that's not the case, other than spend, you don't want to spend more money than it's going to take you to to get the insurance. But outside of that, you know, we've had a couple of clients who were like, we can't afford to have cybersecurity insurance anymore. And I said, well, you got to understand, then you're self-insuring, right? So you have two choices under that set of circumstances. You can try to lay off some of that risk or not, but it doesn't change the risk itself. It's still there, right? What could happen could still happen, whether you have cybersecurity insurance or not. And that's been not a fun conversation for them, but it is what it is, you know?
Well, and they should take that to heart of if the risk is that high, then they should be doing something. Right. I mean, if those premiums are that high, then.
Yeah, it's a definite market signal that, I mean, if nothing else, for those of us in the MSP world, right, it's supportive of the message that we're trying to preach around this, or again, around a layered security model or a zero trust aspiration model, right? Because it points out, look, this is how expensive it is if you don't do these kinds of things, if you don't mitigate that risk.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the average ransomware attack is a $2.1 million event now.
I mean, yeah, you're talking about, seven digits moving towards 8.
Right.
That's real money, right? And the customers that we're seeing get attacked and have had issues, these are not particularly large companies in all instances, right? These are now, companies with 100, 200, 500 employees. So good, solid mid-sized companies, but they're not big public companies, right? These are smaller companies. Point being, to your point around the business model evolving, the organized criminals in this space have figured out there's money to be made from these smaller companies as well.
Absolutely. Well, and when you look at it from the model of what the attackers are going to go after, they're going to go after the easiest prey. And larger companies have been shoring up their cybersecurity over the last several years. So the Target breach really was the first breach that made big national news, and that was 2014.
Right.
And so every Fortune 500 company after that happened said, wow, we have to take this seriously and shore up our systems. And so started with the Fortune 500, the Fortune 5000, and now those companies are much harder to break into. So where are they going to go?
Yeah. It's the old, how do you when, if you and your buddy are camping and a bear comes into the campsite and you start running and the buddy says, why are you running? You can't outrun the bear. And he says, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. That sort of thing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely the case. Well, I've taken up a good bit of your time. I'll kind of try to wrap you up here with a couple of questions. CryptoStopper's fairly new, not that new, but fairly new. What do you where's your head in terms of aspirations? What do you hope people are going to say about CryptoStopper in 2, 3, 5 years?
I hope that people say, why wasn't this invented sooner?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great testament, right?
I do hear that some now. It would be nice. I really think this technology needs to be ubiquitous, where we're watching at the data level for the attack behavior.
I did want to ask a question, and I thought about that for just a second. What's the potential for false positives, or how does the algorithm? Is it that distinctive? Is the footprint distinctive enough where you don't have a concern about legitimate activity being flagged?
Yeah, so we do have some false positives. We have over so the product has been in production and use a little over a year, but we had built it and had been using it within our own MSP for several years before that. And so we've taken care of the vast majority of those false positives, but we still get a few false positives, and we have the ability to whitelist individual folders, and then also whitelist processes, which we don't like to whitelist processes because you could have an attack that utilized yeah,
that's a honeypot at that point, right? If it's a whitelisted process.
Exactly.
All right, final question. So you're in the space around cybersecurity. When you think about everything that's going on and what's been happening, do you feel optimistic or pessimistic about the future going forward? And when I say future, I don't mean 10 years from now? What I'm in the next year to 3, fair near term.
So I'm an optimistic person by nature, and so I'm very optimistic about the future. I am also very optimistic that cyber attacks are going to increase over the next.
So you think it's going to get worse before it gets better in that front?
Yeah, I definitely feel it, that from a cyber attack standpoint, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I don't know where I have said since about 2016, 2017 timeframe that I thought 2024 would be the peak of the cyber attacks. And that's based on, 10 to 12 years of these attackers really learning and perfecting their craft. And so I think at that point, and the cybersecurity tools are getting much better. So I think around 2024 still is where that peak, and then we'll be at a plateau for a while before it starts to tail off.
Gotcha. Okay. So I always like to wrap up with a few kind of personal questions personal. This is not Oprah. I don't mean that kind of personal questions, but I know that I understand at least that you're mechanically inclined. So maybe you can tell us a little something that you've been working on non-IT, kind of outside of the office, so to speak.
Yeah, so I'm a private pilot, and I have a plane that a buddy of mine and I built together. It's a 2-passenger Lancer, and we recently upgraded the avionics suite in it, and so we have all touch panel, what they call glass cockpit in it now, and I'm working on getting my instrument rating in that so that I can go and fly in the clouds.
How did you get interested in aviation? Has that been a lifelong passion, or is that something fairly new?
Yeah, so it was a lifelong passion, and something that I always wanted to do, and started working on my pilot's license actually in 2000, and then I was actually flying on 9/11 2001 when the towers were attacked, and we were practicing avionics out, so no audio communication, had our radios off, and had no idea what was happening until we came back and landed.
Wow. So you'll remember that day. I mean, for lots of different reasons. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Last question. Tell us about your first technology memory as a child, and it can't be TV.
Well, so I had an Apple IIe as a 4th grader, and started writing in BASIC, which is a programming language.
Commodore 64 for me. I didn't have one, but my buddy did. And we got these books that you could have the programs where you could go write them, and the screen would draw pictures or make a little, we thought it was the coolest thing we'd ever seen.
Yeah. I mean, it's spending hours and hours writing these programs back then. Yeah. So that's my earliest memory, was from 4th grade.
Got it. And you kind of stuck with it all the way through in terms of technology.
I have. Yep. I've been a geek from way back.
Well, Greg, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Good luck with the company. I'm excited about what you guys are doing. You're doing good work. Definitely needed. And I hope our paths cross again in the near future. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Bryan.
Yeah. Take care. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @cuttheshit_pod. We are also on TikTok @cuttheshitpod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.